So we've got a lot of this going on at the moment. You know, everywhere you walk, there's a little something. It's morning, it's dark, the kids just got off to school. Got my coffee. And here we go. Dave's fancy light that he got on Craigslist. And then things are happening. So we've got the wall. There was no wall right there a few days ago, and now there is a wall. And then these doors are gonna hang with sliders. So it'll be kind of like, barn door kind of thing. We decided to get the same style door as the rest of the house, just to make it all seem like it makes sense. If we threw up some like rustic wood in this very sort of modern plain house, it wouldn't make sense. So I think this will look really nice, but also fit the design. And then I'll paint everything this cloud white color. And then Chloe wants to put wallpaper up on this wall, so we've got to think about that next. But there's this layer of dust over everything. I didn't really have a chance to move stuff from there because I didn't know that was going to happen. And then over here in my pantry, I moved the rug, but all my jars and stuff are covered in that whatever it is. So that's what's going on here. All right, this video is going to be made over the course of many days because we're going to follow along on this soup making process. So it'll be about 3 days for the beans and then 1 to 2 days for the actual chili. So let me show you about soaking and sprouting beans first. These are Kentucky pole beans that I grew and then dried and stored in jars. So I got a lot of Kentucky pole. They're delicious. The very quick version of this is first you're going to soak them in water where you put a tiny bit of lemon juice, or you could put a little yogurt, and you're going to soak those overnight. So, just start them whenever, leave them overnight. In the morning, you're going to drain that off. So you're going to dump the beans in the water in here. You're going to rinse off the beans, and then you're going to leave them in the colander, and you can just put it onto like a plate under here, or I usually just put it in another bowl, and you just let it sit. And then a few hours into the day, you come back, you rinse it off, you do it again. And you're just going to do this for 2 days, usually, maybe 3, until it starts to sprout. You can't forget to come in and rinse it off like 2 or 3 times a day because the bean needs to stay wet to be able to sprout. And then you'll see, I'll show you when the bean sprouts, I'll show you that process. And then you can cook your beans however you like. You can do that in a pot on the stove. You can do that in an Instant Pot. A lot of people find that they digest the beans better if they cook them in a pressure cooker in an Instant Pot. So totally up to you, but it does take a few days to get through this process. When you soak and sprout your beans, you are removing that phytic acid from the bean. That's what stops you from being able to digest it. So this is a really good practice to get into, to learn how to sprout your beans before you cook them and eat them. You'll feel so much better after you eat your beans. Promise. Well, the beans have finally started to sprout. I think this is day 3. 3? Sounds about right. So now the plan is to cook them up in the Instant Pot, and that will, you can see that little sprout right there. That will create a really nice soft bean for the chili. here are the rest of my onions that I grew this year. However, some of them are starting to sprout. So I'm gonna be using these in the chili right now, the ones that are sprouting. Look at that. Plants wanna grow. Plants want to grow. Now these tiny little onions, I don't usually cut up for stir fry or soup or anything. I usually add the tiny little ones into my stock, into the bones and stuff to make the stock. But in this case, because these little ones are sprouting, I am gonna go ahead and just chop those up. So here is the sprout, basically, what the plant's starting to grow inside, and I am gonna remove that. I don't know what it tastes like. I imagine it's bitter like garlic. I do this when my garlic is sprouting too. I just remove that little section from the middle. Like that. All right, so all the beautiful onions have been added to 2 pounds of ground turkey that I just browned up in a little beef fat. And then I'm going to add anywhere from a teaspoon to a few tablespoons of each of these. So like the cinnamon will be much less than the chili powder. These two will be about the same. So I'm thinking like a teaspoon, 3 to 4 tablespoons, a couple tablespoons. And that's probably just all bologna because I don't even measure. So cinnamon, cumin, chili powder, garlic powder, right into that fat. You want to cook it up right into the fat. And we'll let that go for a minute, and then we'll add some broth and some tomato. All right, this looks pretty good. I think I'm going to add a little more chili powder and a little more cumin. And then I'm just going to go ahead and do salt and pepper now. And then stir that up. Let me turn this down, see if I can get the steam to stop. All right, I'm going to add beef broth that I made yesterday from the bones of some steak we had. This is a squash that I had in the freezer. I believe it's a futsu. I'm not exactly sure. I think so. I drained as much of the liquid as I could off of it. So it's just a container of the squash. And then I've got my tomatoes that were from 2020 that are going to go in. And the entire thing of tomatoes is going in. Do that now. The entire tub of squash is going in. That'll cook down. And I don't know how much broth, quite honestly. Just gonna stir with a little bit. And I can always add more, but I can't take it out, so I'm just gonna let that cook while those beans are in the Instant Pot. And the squash will just kind of work its way through. It could be an Illinois squash too. I'm not entirely certain because I did not label it. You could certainly do this with like a butternut squash that you cube. I'm using what I have in the freezer because I need to find some recipes to use up all the frozen squash that I have. See how it just kind of works its way in there? And then we'll just let that cook up. This is a cast iron pot. I'm gonna put the top on and just let that do its thing for a little bit. I feel like making chili is so much more of a curiosity and using what you have than it is any sort of recipe that you need to follow. I'll do often a turkey chili with mushrooms, carrots, celery, zucchini, things like that. No beans, just like the ground turkey, the spices, the tomato. This time, because I'm using that squash, oh, and peppers. This time, because I'm using the squash, I decided to not do anything else other than the onion and the bean. And then I'm probably gonna add some like fermented hot peppers. I don't know. We'll see where this takes us. Things that are preserved in the chili are the tomatoes, the squash. The broth could have been preserved, it happened to be fresh. The beans were harvested, dried, and then if I add like a fermented salsa or some salsa or fermented hot peppers, that kind of thing. So it is a pretty good, oh, and the onions I grew as well. So it's a pretty good gathering of what I had. I sourced the turkey outside, you know, I didn't grow my meat. A couple other meals I made recently, because I wanted to really start to use up a really large stash of green beans we have in the freezer, and dark greens, kale, things like that, is I took some leftover rice and I cooked up the green beans and the rice in some lard, and then I added the kale and I just crumbled it in, and I ate this for over the course of 2 days. The first day I had it with kind of like a bowl, in a bowl form, where I put some cashews on top, and then I put a little green goddess dressing and a scoop of hummus. And then the next day I made a fried rice out of it. So I scrambled some egg into it, a little coconut aminos, and then some sauerkraut, which is also another thing that we have preserved. So it was a really nice way to use up leftover rice. And then, oh my gosh, the green beans are so good when they're fried in some sort of animal fat like that. Delicious. Somewhere along the line, I forgot to show the beans being added in, but the beans were added in, the chili cooked on the stove for a whole other day, and then I just pulled out an individual serving right here that I'm going to eat. You can see it thickened up really nicely. Here are a couple things. These are, I just called them hots. These are fermented peppers that I ran through the blender. And so it's just a really nice peppery taste, very spicy. And then that's the fermented salsa. So I'll be adding both of those. I have the finished product. So I've served this. Can you see that there is a potato under here? This is a white sweet potato, but you can just use a baked potato, especially if you've grown those and preserved those or stored them. Then I have the chili. I have some sour cream, some salsa that I made from summer tomatoes and peppers and onions, some raw goat cheddar, and then some cilantro that I picked up at the store. I think I might have some frozen, but I just couldn't dig it out and I felt like having something fresh. So there is a beautiful meal. It took quite a few days to complete it, but it just feels so good knowing how many things that we grew and we preserved and we stored. But the trick is you gotta figure out how to eat them, and you have to eat them. Because before we know it, we are going to be harvesting again. Thanks for being here. Appreciate you.